devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to The Anadromist. This is Burn Power, coming to you again, finally finished with my wanderings and getting new ideas that I'm loaded up with ideas. So hopefully we'll have more videos coming soon, but welcome. One of the things I've been thinking about lately, I've got several ideas, but the one we'll work on now is the following. Sometimes I meet people through the channel. I met some people with in the London Estuary group. That was interesting. But people who think I know a lot, which I always kind of laugh at. One of the things that happens, I obviously have spent a lot of time learning things and reading and watching films, listening to speeches and lectures, watching documentaries, reading magazines, obviously spending time on the internet, watching various commentators and absorbing ideas, listening to music, all of these things. And because I have, and I'm 68 years old, so I'm not young, obviously. And I've been doing this since I was, we'll just say the age of 20, just to give a round figure, although obviously I started before then as well. But people will say, Bern, you know everything about everything. I had someone from the puppet community, my friend Nicolas Géo, says, you know everything, you know everyone. Well, I don't. Nobody does, obviously. So what I thought I would do is just to let you know a couple of things. One, what I don't know. And then degrees of what I do know. And I think what you'll see is, if you ever hear, I'm going to start off telling you some of the things I know nothing about. It'll be a very short list, because I know nothing about these things. And in fact, there are things that I don't know that aren't on the list, because I don't know them. That's the funny thing. So, but as we go on, I will get to what I consider to be the things I know the most. Now, I'm not doing this to brag, because obviously telling you what I don't know opens me up for people saying, oh, you said this about that, you don't know anything. Well, you know, I can also do research. I know how to do research, which is probably something I should have put down here on this list, for a specific topic when I need to. So I'm not ignorant, and I'm immediately thinking of things that didn't make any of the list. That's how it goes. That's how knowledge is. But I'm doing this also that you can think for yourself. If you have an idea of what you don't know about, maybe you won't make stupid comments about those things.
Well, I've never seen no plants grow out of no toilet.
Hey, that's good. You sure you ain't the smartest guy in the world?
Yeah.
So let's go back.
Okay, look, you want to solve this problem, I want to get my pardon, so why don't we just try it, okay? And not worry about what plants crave.
Brondo's got what plants crave.
Yeah, it's got electrolytes.
What are electrolytes? Do you even know?
It's what they used to make Brondo.
Yeah, but why did they use them to make Brondo?
Because Brondo's got electrolytes.
This first group of things I'm going to tell you about, they're in the category of, I really have no idea about these things. And it's interesting when I hear someone telling me about it. In Alaska, I know nothing about planes, and I would meet someone who was a pilot, or could take apart a plane and reconstruct it. And I would listen to that person, and I would tell them, tell me. I still didn't know much, but I was interested. And I would look at all of these things that I don't know anything about as potential subjects for future exploration. I'm 68. How long will I live? I don't know, but any of these could suddenly mushroom out. And we have an example of a very recent one, which I'll get to in the second list. So the first list is this. This is things I know nothing about. And we'll start off with automobiles, cars. I literally know so little about it that when you open up a hood and I have to do something, I just get completely confused. I've spent a lot of my time living in New York City, in Alaska, where I did, to fix, I don't know, the headlight on a car or something, I would look up on YouTube and sit there and go, okay, this, that, but literally a complete idiot with regard to automobiles, except in one area. I can drive very well. And I often say there are three kinds of knowledge. There's dashboard knowledge, that is for instance, your ability to drive. There is mechanical knowledge, your ability to fix the car. And then there's engineering knowledge, your ability to make a car. But I would say I know how to drive quite well, and I've driven over some strange terrains. But when it comes to the subject of automobiles, their history, who invented the first, I just only a couple years ago figured, they were made in Germany. I have no idea. Know nothing. Trains, very similar. I know that they were invented in England. I know that America has them. I know there's a difference between a narrow gauge and a regular gauge, and that the Russian gauge is different. But I have no idea really what I've just said. I do like taking trains, especially in Europe, and I've taken trains across America. But I know nothing about trains. I know nothing about ships and boats. I've been on them. I'm not afraid of them. I don't worry about falling off. I've taken the ferry in Alaska. I know a little bit about ferries. But basically, I know nothing about ships. I know nothing about planes, as I mentioned. I know nothing about industrial machinery of any sort. And that includes household devices. I know nothing about washing machines, nothing about dryers, nothing about dishwashers, nothing about anything that goes in a house, a water heater. They're just completely off my table. One thing you'll start noticing here with a lot of these things is many of these things are very practical. And I would say, just given the way I've lived my life, a lot of the practical things are off the table because I've spent so much time. There was a man in Alaska, a lovely man. He was in his, I think about 80 years old when I met him. He died a few years later. His name was, I want to remember his name. Okay, we'll cut that. He was around 80 years old when I met him. A lovely man. And he said to me, he came to my, okay, we're going to start this one over. So there was a man in Alaska, lovely man, about 80 years old. He, for some reason, he met me at this church, and I did a history of music, about 13 parts, and I had people coming over to my house when I first arrived in Alaska, and he came over, and he listened to me, and he was amazed by all the things. He was especially amazed by the way music had changed so much, and he hadn't noticed it. And he came up to me many times, his name is Tom, and he came up to me many times and said, "Bern, I just don't know how you know all of this information." And I said to him, "Tom, you can fix your own car or truck, right?" He goes, "Well, yeah." I said, "You can pull apart your boat and put it back together." And he goes, "Well, yeah." He says, "You can take your plane and pull it apart." He goes, "Yeah." That's how. I have no idea what any of that means. So many of these things are practical. Which means I don't know anything about engineering, anything to do with engineering. I have no idea. I had a friend who was working at some sort of engineering degree, and he would come in and he would say words like viscosity, and I was like, what is that? Later I figured out it has something to do with the thickness of water or whatever, but obviously I have no idea. Which then means I know nothing about computer science. I couldn't code. The only code, I don't know Morse code, even though I got a radio license, but I don't know anything about, oh, radio, I should put that down in the good pile. I don't know anything about computers, except I'm pretty good on the surface level. We'll say the driving part I'm good at. I can obviously edit videos and do some creative things. I can go on the internet. I can, I know my way around. I'm a better driver. But when it comes to what's under the hood, no idea. Mathematics. Some people think I'm intelligent because I could do my income tax. But that's just because they were so lazy, they would just hand it to someone else to do for them. And to me, it was just like pretty simple math. If you would focus, and I would purposely do my own income tax every year, especially in the years where it got weird, just to see if I could do it and keep my brain sharp. But as far as mathematics goes, I was an absolute idiot. It was the only class in high school I got an F in, which meant I was failing. I won't go into that story. Maybe someday I will. But basically, yeah, math, me, no. Chemistry. Sounds like a great thing. I love reading Michael Polanyi, who is a great chemist and philosopher. Reading his books, and occasionally he'll mention things. He'll have equations down. I'm sitting there going like, "Ah, these look really cool." I did like algebra a bit more than some of the other things, but I still dumb. Astronomy. I know that you look through a telescope. I know I can identify a few things in the air, in the sky, and that's it. So, don't ask me about the azimuth or the declension of this. I have no idea what those words really mean. Sports, except for one area, the Olympics, which for some weird reason I followed for many years because I looked at people in the Olympics much the way I look at dancers. As people doing something, I have no idea what they're doing, but it's mysterious. Why would a person spend so much of their life trying to be a great swimmer or a great athlete, track and field? I have no idea. This is just completely outside of the realm of my thinking. But I'm fascinated by the oppositional character to myself of that. I'm obviously on some very different track. However, so I know a bit about the kinds of sports you would play at the Olympics. And I know a little bit about baseball. But all the rest of the sports, American football, basketball, you name a sport, hockey, no idea. No idea whatsoever. I'm not interested in sports. I don't look at sports. Every now and then I'll watch, be around someone. I'll try to watch a football game in America. And I'll just say to myself, why are they doing this? And what is it? I don't get what, the downs and they're throwing the ball. Why? Okay, I know you can run with it sometimes, but basically I'm a total ignoramus when it comes to sports, particularly competitive team sports. Economics. Does anyone understand economics? There was a guy in New York who worked in Wall Street that I befriended near the beginning of my 16 years there. And he came over to my house, and we were talking, and I was trying to pick his brain. Of course, by the time he was done, I was no more intelligent than I am now. I know a few concepts. I know there's inflation and deflation, but there's different things. We pick up whatever is fed to us through the news during periods of economic crisis. But basically, most people have no idea. And that includes your own personal economics. People often say Taylor Swift is a genius. Well, one thing she's a genius at is economics. She knows how to market herself. She knows where her money is going. It's because she had two parents who were financial advisors in the real world of stocks and bonds and money. I am not, which may be one of the reasons why I usually don't have any money. It's just a thought. So business and finance also, obviously. I know a little bit of, I have some ideas about these things, but part of my problem is I come up with ideas, and later I see these ideas put into practice, but I couldn't possibly do those ideas because I already see the end result of, for instance, having an idea and then seeing what it's going to do, and sure enough, it does it. So I won't go into some of those things, but we'll just say business and economics and finance and law. Who knows what's going on with law? There is a reason why we pay lawyers a lot of money. It's because they have to read a lot of books and know a lot of things. And we watch, I like watching a legal drama, courtroom drama and such. And you pick up these little things, and, I pick up the same kinds of little things. But I am not qualified to speak about law really at all. Except I know we need the rule of law, and I have a very good idea of what that means because I understand philosophy a bit better than I do the law itself. And that's very interesting what's happening in Georgia here right now. There's a bit of a crisis over a law that's being introduced, and part of the problem is they don't really have the rule of law yet. But I really don't understand. I would never comment on Georgian laws because I know nothing. Horses. Now, it's weird. I've just made a weird shift here into another area, but this is kind of practical too. I do know something about some other animals, but horses, complete mystery. I think I've been on one a total of once in my life when I was about 9 years old. And I like watching movies with horses in them, westerns, or even, someone's raising horses. I've seen Black Beauty and, whatever, horses. But I know nothing about horses. It's a world unto itself, and a very strange world from this perspective. And related to that, I know nothing about farming, I know nothing about ranching, I know nothing about gardening. I mean, I could come up with some tidbits and facts, and I lived on a very unproductive farmland in California. It wasn't unproductive because we couldn't make anything grow. It was unproductive because we didn't know anything. And I have made experiments in trying to get things to grow, and failed most of the time. Right now I've got a kumquat tree. It's doing nicely. It's growing. And I haven't had kumquats on it for a year. But at least it's growing. It's alive. I feel happy. I'm keeping it alive. I know nothing about these things. Entomology. Insects. What in the heck is going on with insects? No idea. I know that, just like, okay, don't freak out around bees because then they will sting you. Don't freak out around spiders. They're doing a good job in the corners somewhere, hopefully. I have seen a few insects in New York City. There was one that was like this almost transparent centipede. Freaked me out. But I caught it because it had come out of the woodwork somewhere and put it in a solution of alcohol. Evidently, I know nothing about chemistry, so, Herpetology, the study of reptiles. I liked catching lizards as a kid. I don't mind snakes and turtles and amphibians and such. I could have developed a real interest. Any of these things could have piqued my interest if I had come across it. But I have a friend back in Alaska who is a herpetologist, goes down to the deserts of California, the Mojave Desert, and studies a tortoise. And he spent 20, 30 years studying one tortoise in the Mojave Desert and how it lives, and especially it started to die off, and he's trying to figure out why. And he said to me, I know quite a bit about the study of reptiles, and I've been studying this tortoise for 20, 30 years, and there is a lizard that lives in the same environment, and I can tell you this with absolute certainty. No one knows anything about it. And that's a strange kind of thing. Ceramics. I know nothing about ceramics, pottery, all this stuff. I did take a ceramics class once in high school, made a really weird multi-opening, I can't even describe it, multi-mouthed, what would they call it? Vase. And no idea. And I look at stuff. My mother really liked ceramics. She didn't know much about it, but she liked fine china. And I inherited a couple of pieces from her, and I have no idea what that means. So, what makes fine china versus normal eating ware? No idea. Furniture. I'm sitting on it. This isn't particularly good furniture, but it's not particularly bad furniture either. But I don't know anything about it. Most people don't. They buy terrible furniture. You can walk into an IKEA or IKEA if you're over here in Europe and find all this stuff that's who knows how it's made, and it's made in Vietnam or someplace, and you know, it's just like nobody knows anything about it. They have all this imitation wood now. Nobody knows. People can hardly know the difference between the plastic wood and the real wood anymore. And I spent a while trying to buy furniture, but then when it comes to antiques, another field, you know, now I know old books and records and things, but when it comes to pieces of furniture, I can't tell you what came first or whatever. I can't identify different stages of furniture. I know a few things. That's Art Nouveau. This is older. You know, that must be from the Middle Ages or from somebody's European farm. I have no idea. Jewelry. What is jewelry? It's a bunch of rocks and minerals, which I know nothing about either. So there you are. These are things I am confident that if you talk with me about it, I know nothing. I will be very interested to learn a few things, but that's all I'm going to learn from you is a few things. I cannot talk intelligently about these things. So let's move on to the things I know a bit about. Okay, so here are some of the things I know something about. I'm not a complete ignoramus, but I'm also, none of these are areas I have any expertise in. And when I meet someone, I can sound intelligent when I talk to them, but I will be just filling in a few more gaps. So physics. If I'm around someone who is a physicist, I know enough to ask certain questions. I have certain questions that have come up. I've done enough reading and such to be able to ask an intelligent question. But I certainly don't know physics, and chances are you don't either unless you studied that specifically. Geology, similar. I know there's, 3 basic kinds of rocks, and I'm fascinated by rocks. But I don't know, that is to say, the appearance of rocks. As I just said, I don't really know anything about rocks and minerals. But geology itself is fascinating. How things move and morph and, this kind of thing. So if I'm around someone who knows these things, I'll ask some pretty intelligent questions. Geography, I know more about. And enough to be able to, talk even more intelligently about it. I can tell you the effect of mountains upon an ecosystem. I can talk to you about rivers. I can talk to you about lakes and oceans and temperatures and all of these things. But, it doesn't go much beyond just a kind of an interest in it. But again, if I'm around someone who's a geographer, I'm going to be prying them open with questions. Biology, same thing. I'm particularly interested more in people who do field work than I am people who do lab work, although I did have a very good friend in New York City who worked on neurobiology. And he came up to visit me in Alaska, and one of his specialties was taking the brains out of small fish and looking at them and deducing certain things from them. And we had very interesting conversations about that. But when he came up to Alaska, I showed him some salmon, and he said, "Oh," and he said someone had just pulled a salmon out of a lake, and it was, I can't really show you here. It was longer than that, but he said, do you mind if I look in the head of the salmon? And he pulls out a little marble-sized thing, and said, "That's what's controlling these to go from here almost all the way to Japan and back to the same stream as this little marble-sized thing, the brain." Let's see. Paleontology, dinosaurs. It's always fascinating, but I certainly don't have an avid interest in it, not the way I did when I was young. Tom Holland, the historian who specializes more in the ancient world, is also just an absolute dinosaur hound and knows probably far too much about it. But it's interesting talking and hearing the passion for dinosaurs that he has, that I don't have. Like I said, I had it as a child. I think many children go through their dinosaur phase. I did, and I left it. But it's nice to talk about. And every now and then I will read up a little bit of something about that. Same with anthropology. I'm fascinated by that. Ancient history, really fascinated by ancient history. If I get around someone, like if Tom Holland were to walk into the room right now, oh yeah, I have lots of questions. Can we talk about the cult of Mithras? Can we talk about what do you think was the relationship between Zoroastrianism and Gnostic philosophy? I would love to talk about these things. I know enough to talk, but I would never consider myself an expert. Let's see, natural history, so the environment, plants and animals, and flora and fauna, all of that. Now, there are animals I do know a bit more about. Dogs, cats, cows, don't ask, pigs, ditto, and other domestic animals that I raised on a farm when I was in my Jesus People commune days. And cats I did kind of a study of here, watching them outside and realizing I would watch them and then go look up some material on the behavior I was seeing and then realize, everything we know about cats is about them as pets and not them outside. And when people do write things about them outside, it's always about, the feral cats and what we should do about them. And it's never the feral cats and how they actually live, which is, as I observed, very violent. So if I was to get around someone who really knew something about cats, I'd be like, yes, I'd be prodding them. In other words, in this category of things I know something about, it's stuff I'd like to learn more about, and I would be asking a lot of questions and making a couple of observations. Philosophy. I'm in touch with some philosophers here. I can kind of keep up, but when they get into the weeds, and philosophers can get into some pretty thick weeds, they kind of leave me behind. Politics, similar. You have to have a certain kind of mind. I know something about U.S. politics. I know something about UK politics. I know something about French politics. And there are a few other places, Canadian politics and such. I know nothing about Georgian politics. I mean, probably more than the average person, but still, how does it really work? I don't know. And one of my observations is, do Georgians know? I don't know. Photography. Now, I can take some pretty good pictures. So I have good driving knowledge dashboard knowledge of photography. I can make the picture look good. But all that other stuff, the technical stuff with this camera, I was just spending 15, 20 minutes trying to figure out, thank you, Richard Lund, for passing this camera on to me. Trying to figure out the new rules. It is a Canon. I had a Canon before. It takes me years to figure it out. And even that, I am not a photographer, nor do I know the history of photography that well. But when I get around photographers, I'm always interested to pick up a bit more knowledge and to learn more. And it's the same with design. And we're talking here general design, the design of buildings and furniture and products and all of this. I find that really fascinating. I find there's a lot of issues related to it. Why are you designing it like that? Especially, it's just like, why did the book cover go from being a work of art to being ridiculous? Why are they making more books with a case laminate cover, and all of these kinds of design questions? So if I get around someone who knows design, I'm in. But I'm also no expert on the subject. Poetry, ditto. I like poems. I have, there are groups of poems that I like. There's an awful lot about poetry I don't like. And if I miss my guess, unless I miss my guess, there's a lot of people these days who don't know much about poetry anymore, sadly. Opera, ditto. There's a few operas that I like, but they have operas here in Tbilisi. I've never been to an opera. I've heard a few people sing an aria or something from an opera. Usually these are not professional singers, and so the work suffers as a result. But of course I have recordings of operas. But of all the musical subjects, this one's on the bottom of the list, which is why it's here. Architecture. Now, architecture is interesting to me because it's gone out of the I know absolutely nothing about this category in the last few years to now I know something about this, I've got questions. And if I keep going, I've got a few books on the subject, it may progress to the next stage. And finally, there are countries. I mentioned geography, and there are places that I know something about. When it comes to geography, like I say, I know enough about geography to ask intelligent questions. And that's all the things in this field. But I would say I know less about Asia, less about Africa, less about the Middle East, less about South America. So I know much more about Europe, much more about North America, including Mexico, more about Japan. When I get to China, things start getting weak, and then when I get to Southeast Asia and South Asia, my knowledge decreases rapidly. But I'm still interested, and I'm not stupid when I ask questions. So those are the things that I know something about. And like I say, I could be missing subjects. I just made these lists off the top of my head. Let's go on to the next area where I do know something. This next category is what I'm calling things I know well enough to discuss in depth. So before this was things that I have a general interest in that I can discuss, we'll say, intelligently. But in this next category, I'm a bit more than intelligently involved. And so in this category, we have history in general. I have been interested in history since I was young. And I don't know all the history everywhere, but I have a pretty good idea of the general overview of history. I know how it worked in different places. If I meet someone who knows something about history, I'm in. I am ready to talk. I'm ready to really dig in and such. And I have my opinions. This is no more true than in Christian history. I certainly know a lot about Christian history. I've taught classes in the subject. I have my thoughts about different denominations and such. And you could throw in theology here as well. I certainly am not an amateur when it comes to any of these things. On the other hand, when it comes to the internet and social media, I'm also not an amateur. I know people who have kind of a passing, they go on Facebook now and then, they use Amazon, they do these standard things. But if someone says to me, I need to look up something, I will dredge it out very quickly, what I need. I can find, when it comes to searching, I am certainly above average. Why? Because I know all this history. Because I can immediately go, aha, which is what makes, I've been making experiments with AI. It makes me pretty good at it because I have a vast array of topics and names that I can use. Also, I have very strangely, although not so strange if you know my history, I am not an amateur in a discussion of physical media software. So when it comes to LPs, vinyl, the younger kids call them vinyls, which I always find so cute and annoying. CDs, LPs, 45s, DVDs, Blu-rays. There's the new 4K thing, and I'm thinking about sticking my finger in it. But basically, all the different ways we have of preserving media. I am not an amateur on these things. And I know, for instance, how these things age. I know right now I'm thinking about my library in Alaska, and I'm thinking about, oh man, it was a little bit too humid in there, and I need to get my friends to put in a dehumidifier in there because I know what's going to happen. And I'm already starting to smell a bit of must, and I want to prevent that. So yeah, it's a weird thing, but I worked in the music world for a while, buying and selling physical things. So, and I know something about books as well, and newspapers, and magazines and such. And we're just talking about the actual physical thing. Classical music and jazz. These are the only ones in this category musically. Because there's other categories where I know a lot more. But with classical music and jazz, I know enough to have a lot of opinions. I know enough to say something. I know enough to, you don't want to just casually throw at me a jazz comment and make me want to, I will stick up for my opinions. But I will also be very open to learning new things. But, I'm always open to learning new things. But they are not in the next category, which is things I know too much about. I know what I don't know about classical music and jazz. And that is to say, both of them are very big worlds. Where, for instance, if I was to say I was really a jazz aficionado, I would have to be buying a lot of recordings of different people to hear how they sounded at different moments. Because that's what jazz is about, is comparing interpretations, improvisations, moments in time, styles, things like that. Cinematography. I know enough to take, obviously, I'm doing something here, so I know enough. I'm not an expert in it, but for instance, I could make a passable movie, but at the same time, and this is something which has grown out of the previous category in the last few years. Since I've been working on these videos, I've learned more and more and more doing this. Am I an expert? No. Am I a cinematographer? No. And I know where my knowledge stops. That's one thing about knowledge. The more you know, they say, the more you know you don't know. And I know a lot of what I don't know about cinematography, but I know enough to sit there and say, let's talk the difference between Toland's photography on Citizen Kane, and Gordon Willis on The Godfather. Talk about the use of blacks and all of these things. So I'm more than an amateur on this. Comic books. I spent a while in the comic book world in New York City, buying them and working in the comic book business, but also researching the changes going on. Now, at a certain point, I left off following it because I could just see, this is, buying these serial editions of these little, small magazine booklets is endless. And so I keep an eye on it, but I certainly know a lot about the history of it. And so I know much more than just a casual interest. Same with science fiction culture, and for a lot of the same reasons. I'm certainly not a simpleton when it comes to science fiction culture, films, books, knowing that science fiction is essentially one of the very first fandoms after, say, Sherlock Holmes. Science fiction people were there very early, having conventions and such, way before comic books and horror and other kinds of things. Which brings us to mystery and detective fiction, which I enjoy. I love a good mystery book. I love a good mystery novel. I love a good mystery series on television, or I like detective stuff. I love film noir, all of this. So I know that whole species fairly well, but it's not a main focus. And that's what this area is. This is stuff I know pretty well, but I'd never consider it a main focus. I would always defer my opinion to other people who know more. Then literature in general. I have read my share. I'm certainly not an English, I don't have a doctorate in English or anything like that. But I have a pretty good idea. I do, when I get involved with reading, I take it to a limit that I can. Same with theater and drama. Although there are species coming up ahead of theater that I know more about, if you know what I mean. Fashion history. I have done a lot of reading about fashion history. And so you'll notice fashion is not one of those things which I know nothing about. It is something I actually know quite a bit about. So that when I saw that comedy, The Devil Wears Prada, nothing in there was at all very foreign to me. It was, I was laughing because I knew what they were talking about. It's a long story. And then there are certain countries and places that I know pretty well, very well. So, United States, especially Alaska, New York City, California, Texas, and there are other places. I know these things very well. But I'm certainly, again, it's not a main focus. I just happen to pick up this knowledge along the way. The United Kingdom, England, Scotland, Ireland. I've never been to Ireland, but I know tons about it. It helps having an Irish last name, and I'm not Irish. It's a story. But then again, I know quite a bit about Canada, France, Switzerland, the Czech Republic, Georgia, Russia, Ireland, and then countries just bubbling beneath: Poland, the Netherlands, Italy, Spain, Mexico, Japan, Indonesia, and the South Pacific, among other places. And I'm sure there's other places I know about. And if you ask me about these things, I will not sound at all stupid about talking about the second tier. The first tier I would hold up, you throw me in with a group of people having a detailed discussion about certain aspects of, well, obviously America, but of the UK or whatever, and I'm in. I know my subject, I'm ready to go, I don't know everything. It's not a main focus. So now we are in the almost the final category. The next category is things I know too much about. things you should probably tread carefully around me. I've now switched it over from all the categories up to here is points where I want to know more. And, in the beginning I know nothing, then I know something, then I know more than the average person. But now we've just entered the domain where there's a very good chance I know more than you. And these are odd little categories. Some of them are not odd, some of them are big. But I have thought a lot about these things. And now, these are not my actual specialties, which is the last category. But these are the things that I just have too much knowledge. Can I learn more? Like I said, you can always learn more. And the more you know you don't know. And that's always true. So if you ask me, what do you know about music history, Bern? I'll say, a lot. But then there's a hole over here and a hole over there, and you'll start to see what you do. So, what I know too much about, U.S. history. And basically I've lived it. And if you watch something like my How We Got Here series, you realize I spent way too long. And I just got my copy. I've got 85 CDs of my radio history of the 20th century. A lot of that is U.S. history. Having said that, I know a lot about European history as well. I remember there were people coming on a tour in Alaska from the Czech Republic. I was always really happy to meet someone from the Czech Republic because I know something about it. And we got to talking to them, and I said, yeah, well, ever since 1620. And they were saying, how do you know about 1620? I said, puppetry. We'll leave it there. The internet and social media culture, which is different than just my ability to use the internet, but particularly in the late teens and early 20s, where we are now. I have just had to, because of my YouTube channel and stuff, I've had to keep way too much of an eye on these things. Some of these things, like U.S. history or this, it wasn't my choice to learn these things. I'm in the environment, so you pick it up. And I know way too much about these things. And some things I go, I really didn't want to learn that. But there we are. And maybe that'll turn into a video sometime. Theater. Now we're talking especially what I call para-theatrical forms. There's no really good word for things that aren't the main body of theater, but all these other things. So, I call them para-theater, things alongside of the main theater, and main theater being the production of plays and dramas and comedies. So, which I know a bit, I'm a little less interested in that. But these things I'm really interested in. So, ballet, circuses, magic shows, stand-up comedy, puppets, etc. These things, they're really fascinating to me. They aren't quite my specialties, but I know way more than I need to know about them. Art styles and periods. I make it my job to understand how artistic styles differ and why different periods come and go. Technological issues. We're not talking about what's inside the computer. We are not talking about how to search the internet. We're talking here about the kinds of problems that people like Jacques Ellul, Marshall McLuhan, Paul Virilio, Daniel Boorstin, and many others have discussed. Issues related to propaganda, to the way technology and media affect us. I won't go into that. I've got way too many videos on the subject. If you know, you know. Cult history and other related dark subject matter. I've got a whole section in my library, which I've often said, if you were locked in a room and these were your only reading matter, you would be insane after, 10 years being locked in with these books. And I'm not going to enumerate them. All I can say is, I had to learn quite a bit about stuff. I don't talk about this stuff too much on my channel, just because, we can get into the dark weeds here. I'll just put it to you this way. I've got about 6-7 books on the Manson family alone. I've got books on multiple cults and religions. I've got books on, why do people do the evil things they do, getting inside of the dark people. And that's just a sprinkling of the kind of things that I've had to read about. Film history. I'm not David Thompson, but I'm pretty good. David Thompson's one of the best film historians. I know my film history pretty well. Do I know everything? No. Am I an expert? I wouldn't call myself an expert. But if you were to say, hey, Byrne, would you teach a class on film history? Maybe the 1970s, maybe the 1940s, maybe the silent era. Could you do it? Absolutely. I just say, yeah, give me a week to put it together. That's how well I know film history. Music history, particularly the 20th century, we're really almost at the point of my specialties here. I mean, this is a specialty, but it's so broad. I just know too much. I figured it out. CDs, 45s, albums, over, there's some more here. We'll just say 13,000. I've done my time. I've met musicians, I've worked in the music business, I've been a tour manager, I know my stuff. Am I a professional? No. And so I always bow to the person who's been on the road, who's a musician. I bow to the person whose whole life is involved in music history. My whole life isn't exactly involved in this, and we'll explain why in a moment. Comedy. Believe it or not, you don't see this part of me, but I know the history of comedy, particularly in the 20th century, really, really well. And now we're talking in the Anglosphere only, because comedy does not translate well into other cultures. I know a bit about comedy in other cultures. I used to have Japanese friends in Alaska who would die listening to sound effects records, just cackling away, going, ah, and they'd hear like a bell or a car go by, ah, and I'm sitting there going, I have no idea what this is about. But if you want to talk British American comedy and such, I can go shot for shot on you there. Horror culture. Ooh, I know quite a bit here, and I've read quite a few horror novels. I keep up with it, but I don't read all the latest horror books and such. I think there was a golden age for horror books, and no one has really pointed out to me in recent time. If you know of something, let me know. New books that are really great and horrifying. Let's see. And I have my various authors that I keep up with. So Owen Barfield, C.S. Lewis, Jacques Ellul, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and other people I've mentioned in my various videos on book recommendations. And then finally, just totally quirky, spoken word recordings. I mentioned I have a big record collection, but I have, if I factor in albums and CDs, I probably have about 1,500 spoken word recordings, not to mention other. I'm always saving recordings on files and such. I like hearing history. I like hearing authors. I like it. Often a good way to peer into the past and really understand it is to hear the voices from the past. So we'll just say that. Then let's finally get to my real specialties. Did I mention the Bible somewhere in there? It was probably should have been in that last category. Okay, my specialties. These are the things you should ask me about. If you want to know about them, you should talk with me. And these are things I have spent, 30 years in some cases, 40 years. Wow, I'm 68 years old, so something's 50 years thinking about these things. You should talk to me if you're interested in these things, because these are things I know far more than too much about. And there aren't as many categories, obviously. So, music history. But I just mentioned music history. So it's only a few eras that I really specialize in. One is San Francisco in the late 1960s. Another is rock music in general between, say, 1966 and 1970. One could extend it a bit earlier, but that's an area I really spent a lot of time thinking about and collecting. Punk rock and new wave, particularly between, we'll just kind of give some somewhat arbitrary dates, and there are things that fall on either side, 1975 to 1980. And then what was happening in rock music, but we don't really have a good word for this period. Some people say it's the area of grunge or noise music or alternative music. I tend to call this the postmodern era in rock music. And that would be, we'll say, roughly from 1989 to 1995. And again, those are just suggestion dates. There are things that come before and after, but certainly during that period, it was very important. Horror film history. Now, this is different than simply horror history. This is horror films. I think I've got maybe 98% of all the most important horror films, and I have my thoughts about why they changed. So this is not casual. I have quite a few books on the subject, though I certainly haven't collected them all. But for me, what's important is the history of them. So whether it's the very first horror film, which most people consider to be a minute and a half specialty film by Georges Méliès, Le Manière du Diable, the Devil's House, or Castle or Chateau, or whether it's, what did I see? I saw The First Omen a couple of weeks ago. I keep up with things, and it's a subject that I feel very connected to. Why? I have a whole video describing why. Go look it up. And now we come to puppetry, and particularly European puppetry. And again, since most people know nothing about this, and I didn't pick it for that reason. I didn't get interested in it because I said, I want to know something about something obscure. I never would think of doing something for that reason. However, having said that, it is nice to know something about something that is obscure. For instance, when I toured around with a very strange puppet show called The Great Ziggurat for 2 months in 2009 in North America, Canada and America, I was really impressed that no one knew what we were doing before they came. Even the puppeteers didn't quite know what we were doing because I had slipped. I knew where the corners were, and I'd gone outside of them, but also retained the center of what puppetry was as well. And people would come up and say, I've never seen anything like that before. And that's what knowing about puppetry gives me. And people will, I often get these kind of joking comments in the comment sections of various videos where it's just like, what's the puppetry thing, Bern? Why puppetry? And or they just immediately start making comments about the Muppets, which makes me want to just no, I'm not going to even say what it makes me want to do. And at the same time, it's just like, all I can say is, you'll see. Especially if you're much younger than me, you'll see before I'm dead what I'm talking about. And I'm not saying this in any sort of threatening manner. How could I threaten you? Or like, I told you so thing. I'll just say there's this whole thing with the physicality of objects and such, which is another subject I don't even know where to put that in here. And another thing that's very important to me is time and how we live in time. So this could be considered a philosophical, almost scientific kind of interest, but it's more than that for me. But in all of these categories, I am not mono-focused to consider myself a complete expert. I learned enough about European puppetry history before meeting the late, great European puppet historian Henryk Yurkowski in 2012. And I have, this man's wealth of knowledge far surpasses mine. There's a friend of mine, Dimitri Jaganot, in Brussels. His wealth of knowledge on puppetry far surpasses mine. So I don't consider any of these areas myself to be some sort of ultimate, this is not my area of super expertise. It is, certainly by contrast with most people. But if I'm around people who make it their whole life to study these one things, they will see that I don't. A friend of mine once came in, looked at my record collection and said, "Bern, I get it. You are not an expert on San Francisco music or punk rock. You're an expert on something else here." And I said, I'll tell you, here's my true specialty.
Got to keep in some sort of touch with all the loose ends of this dizzy affair if I'm ever going to make heads or tails of it.
It's not any one of these things. It's all of them. It's the relationship between these things. That's what I'm always looking for. And so I'm looking for how these things fit into history, how ideas that, for instance, were bred, say, in England in the late 70s or in San Francisco in the 1960s, during the Symbolist era, the late 19th century, during the Baroque era, during the Roman era, during how all of these things relate to each other and bring us to where we are now. Which is, if you look through all my videos, you'll see that is my emphasis. And that is what I do that most people don't do. Most people have their area of specialty. I have areas that I know a lot about, but my specialty, my true specialty, is learning how these things all relate together. So I've got an idea for a video which I want to do about the relationship between the nose art on World War I German planes, hot rods, symbolist Art Nouveau posters, the creation of this strange custom culture of hot rods in the 1950s and 60s, psychedelic art posters, and more. And it's all, in my mind, it's all one thing, even though I just breached several different categories there. So that is what I do, is I'm looking across. Many people are using a microscope to look in. I'm looking across. I'm taking the whole, I'm more of a weatherman, looking at the predictions of the past and the future, but on a larger scale. And not that I indulge in prediction or prophecy. I'm just trying to understand where we are. And eventually, if this period ever settles down, I will do another How We Got Here series, and you can hope. I'm starting to get ideas for it, but I'm waiting for a few more resolutions. And so, thank you for spending your time listening to me. Sometimes I'm confessing my ignorance. I hope I didn't seem like I was bragging too much. We're always glad for what we know and don't know. And you should be glad for what you know and don't know. And you should find out. You should make a list. What do you think you actually know? What do you want to know? I made a list of the things I wanted to know about music history when I went to Switzerland in 1979. Later, in Alaska, I look back at that list in my journals, which are here somewhere, trying to get through customs. I'll have a report on that later. And I looked and I said, oh my goodness, I know all of these things so well now, and so much more. So if you start asking yourself, what do I want to learn? What do I want to know? Just the very act of doing that pushes you towards it. Think about that. Anyway, this is Bern in Tbilisi, Georgia. If you like this, then subscribe to the channel, please. And you You can hit like. I don't know if the algorithms care about me anymore, but somebody does. You're listening to me, so thank you. And from Georgia, Droabit, we will meet again.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.